Thought this week I would do a floral. I haven't done one for ages, and I thought I'd mix it up a little bit. And I'm doing as I've done on a few other weeks. I'll use my imagination for this. Because I've painted florals quite a few times in the past, I think we'll put a slightly different angle of view on this actually. So rather than just be looking straight across at it. Yeah, so a floral this week. So welcome to this week's tutorial. I'm Howard Jones, and as I've already said, I thought we'd tackle a colourful floral from imagination. So I'm just shaping out my display. Think of a sort of small pot, ornamental pot here, sat on a surface. Perhaps it's a tabletop or a chest. Just a flat surface. We'll have a shadow coming off probably here. Something like this. Nice little abstract shape in there perhaps. Just want to get a design up to get me going. And I think that's probably enough, and we'll rely on paint to do the rest. Okay, so it goes probably without saying that we want some pretty colours in this. So, you know, unlike unlike the landscapes and the cityscapes and that type of scene, I'd be using probably less bright colours. I just want to get a feel for, you know, the subject matter. So I have a range of colours that I fancy using. I've got a colour here called Bright Rose. We can probably play that off against some lemon yellow, or alongside some wet in wet. And what else can we put in here? So far I've got indigo, bright rose, lemon yellow. This is a colour called leaf green. And then perhaps some burnt sienna, as that's my sort of go-to. Burnt sienna and ultramarine blue are my go-to combination for when I want darks. Nice a dark that I can control in terms of temperature. So I'm just going to pick up a 1-inch hog hair brush and just get something going in the background here. Just get something cool to start off with. So maybe cool at the top, slightly warmer down here. Just want that sort of sense of warmish light in the background. So very weak. All I'm really doing here is establishing the overall shape, getting myself sort of comfortable, if you like, making some washes. Perhaps we'll just go a little bit stronger up here in the corner. Let's put lots of water in this. That'll buy us some time, working time. And maybe down as we get onto this surface, which I'm sort of seeing this area as a sort of flat surface. Perhaps that can be cool. reflected light from maybe the source of light maybe coming through a window. So just as you can probably see here, leaving some areas, shapes for what will later be flower heads. I like to take my design off the page on one edge, so I'm using this side over here probably to take some of my shapes right up to the edge, always trying to sort of convey this feeling that the world lives beyond the restraints of this edge of this paper. It's still there, though we can't see it's not included in the crop. But it's still there. I see that a lot, particularly with people perhaps just starting out. I know I used to do it myself. We tend to sort of paint within the constraints of the rectangle up to the edges. See it a lot with trees in landscapes where there's quite a large tree in the foreground, and the shape of that tree never actually reaches the edge of the paper or the canvas, whatever it is that you're working on. So do try to be aware of that, because it does make for a far more convincing painting, I think, when you can suggest to your viewer that life goes on beyond the edge of this piece of paper. We're trying to convince people, as somebody much more famous than me said, a painting is a lie that tells the truth. So I must learn that quote, and I'm just paraphrasing it at the moment. So we've got here enough to be getting on with. What I'm doing here, what I fancy doing here is deliberately creating a cauliflower. So there's quite a bit of water in this brush. If I drop that, let's say, up there like that, and just let it do its own thing, perhaps we'll have another one just there. It's just water. It'll start affecting, having its effect in the next couple of minutes. Of course, if I'd gone in with a stronger initial wash, cauliflowers like this that I'm creating now would be more noticeable. So now that we've got that there, just going to rescue my paint a moment, because it's just the gum arabic that often comes out when you initially squeeze a particularly fresh tube of paint has caused my paint that normally sits on the side there to slide into my mixing area. So I'm just going to clean that off for a moment, because there's colours in there that are not going to be suitable for the next mix that I'm about to make, because those were all cold colours, or opposite colours to the colours I want to keep clean, which are going to be probably the yellow and the rose colour. I've also got a beautiful turquoise here. I think it would be good fun to try that. In this painting. As I say, when painting from imagination like this, I do like things just to morph in a natural sort of way. Right, so let's have a bit of lemon yellow. So in this area here, out here somewhere. A little bit of that leaf green, up fairly close. Like this. So I'm thinking of some of these brighter shapes on our side as we view this. So there's very little water in that. It was really mostly paint. Right, okay. So now that I've got that on there, I can of course just with a brush that's a lot wetter, I can just suggest that lovely colour turning up in some other places, just a few other places here. More reflected colour rather than it being a solid colour of an actual flower. Right, I'm cleaning the brush off all the time as I speak. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to mix up into that yellow, that rose colour. And I'm probably taking a bias towards the rose, not the yellow. And we can suggest these colours in here. I'm going to try something, used to do this a lot, and that is to include a bit of white gouache in my floral paintings. Just feel as though it offers a nice bit of sort of body, a bit of solidity, if you like, to some of these flower heads. So you probably can't see that terribly well. There's the white. And into perhaps these upper areas back here mostly, I'll just scrub some of that white colour just in between the other colours, neighbouring the edges of some of those other colours also. So just take the yellow back a little bit. I think that yellow could just have been a little too up front, too bold. Okay. So it's an anything goes. Often paint 2 or 3 of these in the space of an hour or two, and it may be that only one of them is worthy of putting in a frame. If I get really lucky, and it does happen sometimes, maybe 2, and on the even rarer occasion I get all 3 good results, but I'm happy for 1 out of 3. The opposite of course happens, and I get those days I think we all do, where I'll do 3 and I'm really not happy with any of them. But of course every painting opportunity, for every minute we paint, we're learning. So even if we're learning how not to do things, is every bit as important as learning how to do things. And you don't know whether they're going to work until you try them out, of course. So it's a case of you simply have to do it. You have to always do it. Do it as often as you can, as regularly as you can. Just pushing other colours. This brush, incidentally, is very good. This hog hair brush is fantastic for suggesting. It gives a good edge when you push it. Dragging a brush is one way of moving your paint around and making shapes, but if you can push the brush, so pushing away from the handle, I think there's another thing, that I think is something we don't develop for a while. If we could develop this brushwork by where you're pushing the brush rather than always what I call dragging, painting this way, always sort of moving the brush in that direction. If you can get to pushing a brush around like this, then you're sort of heading into that more advanced brushwork. Okay, so I think now I think we need something to sort of ride against all this, because it's mostly there warms. The cools that I have used are sort of warm cools, if you like. It's a territory by where it's not like it's all blue or green. There's plenty of peachy colours in there, but I think I'm just going to change brush for a moment. And again, I'm going to get rid of the paint that's sitting in my palette. So I just fancy that we need to give the vase itself its own colour, and a colour that might be a colour that doesn't appear anywhere else, or if it does, just a hint of it. So it's that lovely turquoise that I had my eye on, this one here. So if we use that and a little bit of the other blue, which is ultramarine blue, perhaps a little bit of white in that, and we'll just try to take the action of the brush in the direction of the pot, the shape of the pot. Like this. Let's take plenty of water now. So I've delivered quite a bit of sticky dry paint there. And now a little bit of that ultramarine blue. And maybe that ultramarine blue will pop up a bit closer to where the flowers might overhang. Something like this. And I don't think we can see into the pot. There's too much of the actual flower and etc. Hanging over. So there we are. We'll see how that looks in a moment. And sometimes to infer that this is a transparent receptacle, a transparent vessel, could be a glass vase or something, while everything's still wet, what I'll do is I'll take a very sticky amount of paint with no water, just straight paint off out of the paint well. And if I place a couple of lines like this, suggests that the stems of these flowers are that lovely sort of distorted look that you get through glass and water. I could probably change the colour of them a little too, to resemble something a little more organic. So I'm just picking up a little bit of yellow and green there to suggest that maybe a little red actually as well, just to darken. So under here like this, that just about there might suggest that those are the stems of the flowers. Okay, let's look to place some darker colours around now. Just keeping my eye on things. There's a build-up of paint and water down here at the base of the vase. I think I'll just pick that off for now. While it's good to have cauliflowers in the background or around the edge of the shapes, I don't particularly want a cauliflower down here at the bottom of my vase just for the moment. So what we can do is lift a bit of paint out, which might suggest there's some light hitting the bottom of that glass vase. Okay, let's look now at some other shapes. I've got a really cheap natural fibre brush here. It's given to me years ago. I think it's what they used to use in schools. And I'm going to pick up just a bit of ultramarine blue here. Sorry, that's not ultramarine blue. It is burnt sienna. And a little bit of indigo. More burnt sienna. Just going to create a nice dark brown. I'll just tap some of that around in places. perhaps we ought to have a bit more ultramarine blue in this. I'm just trying to give the areas some depth now by suggesting some slightly more shadowed areas. So if I deliver some paint, something like this. Always thinking about, with a mind for creating the positive from, by creating the negative, painting the negative. Sorry, painting the negative to create the positive shape. Find the negative shapes, and you'll find your positive shapes will just come automatically. Okay, now that I've delivered that bit of paint, I'm just going to take most of the water out of this brush, same brush that I was using a moment ago, and I'll just play around into some of those darks that I've created, and at the same time hopefully create the sense of some flowers. And I can probably just scrape the odd shape out at the edge here and there. Into this, this is mostly purple now, this dark that you can see me applying, which is ultramarine blue, the rose, bright rose. And every now and again into that dark I will just drop in, I'll pick up a little bit of burnt sienna and warm the dark shadowy areas up a little bit. So sort of like this. Because I've decided that my shadow is on the right hand side, so it sort of makes sense that most of the shadowy areas are going to be down here on this lower right side. So once I've delivered a few shapes like this, I've delivered a few mixes of darker paint, then I clean the brush and I manipulate those deliveries accordingly to suggest flower shapes here. So I'm really thinking what I'm doing here, the movement of the brush is really creating where this finger is. This finger is the shape that I'm thinking about when I'm doing this, not the actual shape that the paint is making when it's moving around. It's just that I push it out like this just to soften it off. Okay. We're getting there, as they say, I think. Can still go horribly wrong, but I'm not going to get precious about it. If it goes horribly wrong, I'll make a few notes. I'll study it for a bit, ask myself things like, where did it go wrong? Which bit did I feel, this sounds very negative, doesn't it, as though it's going to go wrong. But I think if you can strike a happy compromise between somewhere between not expecting it to go wrong, but a sort of, if it does go wrong, there's you know, you can sort of turn it into a positive because you can study where it went wrong, which you know is there then going to prepare you next time. You're going to be better prepared next time. So there's almost no such thing. If you can try to adopt that attitude, it's almost a sort of, there's no such thing as a mistake or a disaster or a bad painting. It's got to be about the enjoyment, I think, isn't it? So here we are. So I'm thinking, I'm going to put my shadow in next before I do what I'm actually thinking. This is what I'm thinking. I'm thinking that the yellow might be overpowering. The green yellow might be slightly overpowering. I might want to get more pinks in there. But the reason why I'm not jumping in to fix that, to change it straight away, is because I know, from experience, I know that I've got a big shape to make down here, which is the shadow. Depending on the shadow, how that shadow affects, because it will, that making a big shape down here will affect, in terms of colour and tone, will affect the rest of the painting. So if I were to change the bit that I think might not be right at this stage, and go straight to doing the shadow, I might think, oh, you know, the shadow look, the colours up here look great now. So it may be a mistake to change that colour now before I've put the shadow in. Find out what the painting looks like once you put your shadow in before you start changing things you think may need addressing. So let's create a shadow colour. I'm just going to use ultramarine blue and the rose colour for a moment, and I'll probably warm that up with something. So here's that shadow. Imagine it coming from here, something like this. It's going to sort of follow the edge of this shadow up here. It's going to follow the light that's being blocked, the shapes of those things that are blocking the light, the flowers. So something like this. Think about the surface that's falling upon. It's probably running in a, get the sense that it's sort of, the shadow runs in a direction a bit like that. Now let's warm that up. Before I do, I think some of that shadow colour should be tied in for some cohesion here. Tied into this right hand area a bit. Like that. Yeah, so let's warm a little area of that shadow up a bit further. A little bit of burnt sienna. A little bit of the red, of the rose, sorry. And that can go into the shadow area about here. So it's quite close to the vase. Okay. Now again, I fancy lifting something. I've got quite an area of, large area of flatness here. It's not particularly pretty, so what I'm going to do is, it might be just too wet at the moment. Now I could make some shapes in that dark shape by lifting out like this, just squeezing everything out of the brush, every bit of paint, every bit of water. But I like to scrape into areas like this where I can just suggest perhaps there's a leaf or a flower head just catching a bit of light in that shadow there, something like that. But that is a timing thing, of course, you know. You can't just go carving into the paper when the paint's all still very wet there. So think about the timing of that. Press down, that's another method I use. So, okay. So I think what we'll do is, to finish this, I'll take a small brush and we'll suggest some darker flower heads. in one or two places. In here maybe, in here, a couple together. This is a very, what's the word, sort of arbitrary, you know, this is really about placing things where they're going to look best, rather than, you know, reading the rule, sitting down to read the rule book and say, you know, where should these things appear? I think you've just got to say, well, there's need for a bit of emphasis in one area of this painting, and it would make sense that if it was typically off the grid, you know, it could be up here in the top right, top left, bottom right. If you haven't seen my other videos about design and using the grid for composition and for the position of your focal point, then I strongly recommend you take a look at some of those other videos of mine. So, as I said, I'm just imagining some sort of flower head patterns in here. I can also just tap some white gouache into these areas. This. And then perhaps what we can do, we sort of need almost a sort of jazzy, a bit of jazzy colour here. So I'm just picking up the pink and the green and the yellow. And just making a few extra suggestions of shapes. So I'm sort of okay with this, but I'm going to do something that I often do if I'm not 100% sure or happy with at this stage, because it's sort of finished, but there's something I'm hoping I can do that will really sort of change this, improve it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show off the light more in this territory by darkening the background. So let's give that a go. So I'm going to take a lot of ultramarine blue. I'm going to take that red again. Here we go. So just thinking to myself that the background dark colour that I require probably shouldn't be too bright a colour. So although I started with ultramarine blue, I'm putting quite a bit of burnt sienna in that mix. So it's a sort of greyed down blue. Right, so let's cut in. I can probably do it as I did in the other stages, and that's use this scruffy brush just to create a nice broken but crisp edge in some places. Sometimes lots of paint in the brush, sometimes lots of water. Put a little bit of light warmth up there in the corner. Yeah, and I'm liking that already much more. So just keep things a little bit lighter over this corner here. maybe that means I can go just a little bit darker in places over here. And I hope, you know, this might show that it really is about not being precious about your paintings. If I hadn't have thought to myself 5 minutes ago, well, it's not quite where I wanted it, so I'm going to do anything. I'll try anything to put it right, and just accept the fact that you may be right in doing so. You maybe that it didn't work. Your gamble didn't pay off. It doesn't matter. Well, it matters only if you worry about producing something for the frame that's going to go in a frame every time you paint. I've learned not to do that. I've learned that that's bad practice. You're much better off having the attitude, well, I'm really having fun. All I'm doing here is I'm painting, and I, you know, it's the enjoyment factor first, and then deciding that it's okay to gamble, to take the gamble. Gambling, it's cost-free gambling. It's a no-lose situation in a way. All you can lose is a painting that might have ended up in a frame. But it's surprising how more often than not the opposite happens. That in just taking the preciousness out of it and deciding, well, I'm going to give it a go anyway. If you can take that attitude, and you have to be committed to it. It's not sort of kidding yourself. You've got to mean it. You know, you've got to sort of say, well, I really don't care if it goes wrong. If it, you know, I'm going to do this anyway. Because that's where the magic, I think, that's where the real learning starts. It's just that you've got to be prepared to forfeit a number of paintings in the process. Now, I've taken... I wouldn't like to say what the ratio is in terms of when you take these gambles, how often does it pay off, how often does it fail to pay off. But I wouldn't mind guessing, I'm pretty certain about this, that it pays off more often than it fails. The more you do it, the more it seems to pay off. You just got to have that. You just got to have that sort of mindset in the first place. Adopt that mindset, and it will pay off for you as well. Honestly, there. I'm going to leave it like that. See if I can find a mount that we can put around it. Let's have a look at that. There we are. Okay. I hope you've enjoyed this demonstration, and particularly that hopefully it did come across as it was painted. I like that attitude. I'm fiddling, I know, here with the brush in my hand, but I like to think that if people watch these videos and go away from them thinking, you know, that's something I think I'll try, and it works for you, to just try and adopt that attitude thing about, you know, it's only paper and paint at the end of the day. That's all it is. It's a piece of paper. It's water and paint. You know, it's not an offence to produce a bad painting. It's perfectly acceptable. I hope that you can take that away from watching this video tutorial, and I'd love to know how you get on if you do work this way for the next couple of paintings that you make, just to see if it works for you. You do have to persevere with it. It's not going to happen necessarily overnight, but the longer you retain that attitude, it's okay, it's just paper and paint, the more likely it is going to work for you. So good luck, and as I say, I'd love to hear how you get on. It could be a month from now, 2 months from now, you might just sort of say, hey Howard, you know, saw that video of yours, and it does seem to be working for me. Whatever, please let me know your comments. Also, please remember to subscribe if you've enjoyed watching this video, and hit the bell icon also if you want immediate notification as to when I upload my latest videos. And even better, if you could share with friends and colleagues, just click the share icon at the bottom there and pass this video on, or the link to the video on. I'd be really, really grateful. So happy painting, good luck, see you at the next one.